Hey, and hello everyone. Welcome to the ComicBase Livestream. I'm your host, Pete Bickford. I'll be with you here. It's probably going to be a little bit on the short side as shows go, but please, I want to hit as many of your questions as I can. Please post them in the chat and preface them with @ComicBaseTV, and I'll hit as many as I can. So, with that said, let's get on to it. Let's see here. By the way, it is a miracle this show is coming off at all today, so just bear with me here. It's been a crazy day, and I'm juggling a lot of things. But so we'll make this happen as best as we can. There's going to be a little bit of Comic-Base news, a little bit of Windows news, and then the topic for today's show is going to be stress testing, both what we're trying to do to ourselves here building ComicBase, but more importantly, how we're dealing with handling just unprecedented amounts of new information, and some of the ways that ComicBase is struggling with it, some of the ways that we've managed to help it work out real well, and some things that that's a thing. We got to work on that. But also we want to talk a little bit about how to optimize your computer so that you have the easiest time possible dealing with ComicBase in general, but just making your computer fast, in particular. So let's get on to it. So anyway, want to say hi to everyone. By the way, please mash that like and subscribe button and hit the bell notification so you get notified when we do new things, and we'll hit as much stuff as we possibly can. All right, let me rearrange a couple of windows here so I can see what the heck I'm doing, and then we will get right onto it. Wow, that's a lot of things that just scrolled by on the chat. I will hit as much of that as I possibly can. Okay. Anyway, say hey, Fred. Once again, you're the first man in. Let's let me see. Are my keys on? Yes, they are. So anyway, glad to see that West Virginia's shaping up. It is beautiful out here in Franklin, Tennessee, just outside Nashville. It doesn't get any better than this. I wish it could be like today. Just frame it, make it all the days going forth, but no, we're on to miserable humidity and storms after this. But for right now, just couldn't be nicer. Hey Rob, nice to see you and everything. Richard, great to see you as well. Jet City Comics, welcome. Oro, sounds like things are going well in over in Minneapolis. Mike, Lauren, Thomas B. Let's see what else we got in the chat here. Ed, nice to see you as well. And I think that's everyone I think has posted anything right away. So like I say, please, if you have questions you'd like us to hit during the show, please hit them in the chat, and we will hit as much of them as we can. So let me see here. I want to get rid of... sorry. I always wish I had more screen space than I wind up having. So I'm just balancing windows right now, which now everything wants to be kind of weird and not responsive. So okay, that's a thing. Like I say, it's a miracle these shows come off whatsoever. Let me close some windows. Oh, this is fascinating live TV, isn't it? All right. And in the meantime, yeah, for some reason that actually helped. Okay, great. All right, I think we got it now. Excellent. All right, so thank you, all of the software I'm writing, for not locking up utterly on me. Okay, so first of all, in Comic-Base news, we put out a build just before showtime, build 1626. I'm sorry, 1629. It does a number of things that are kind of interesting. If you're coming in from, if for some reason you're finally upgrading from ComicBase 2017 after all this years, or any of those very old versions that we had prior to the shift over to MySQL, it does a better job of handling weird data if you have weird data in your database. It's always good if you can do this prior to converting those old databases. Always a good idea to do a cleanup of your information using the file tools. Just do a rebuild list on the issue information. But in case you didn't, and you've got weird stuff in your database, we do a better job of handling that now. For the rest of us, people are using the more recent versions. Remove is a little bit faster. Especially when you are, getting rid of issues in very large titles. So let's say you were getting rid of 5 issues out of Action Comics, for instance, that you had added by mistake or something, just deleting the lines. It turns out it takes a fair amount of time just to reorganize all the lines in the grid, and it does a better job of that now. Let's see here. We do a better job of handling submits of corrections, again, when you have vast, vast titles. So I think the British Medical Journal or something like that. We will, basically at this point, I think you can submit a basically infinite number of issues at once. You might not want to because each one of them involves a lot of traffic to web servers and back and waiting for response codes and so forth. So it's still going to be, some portion of a second for each one. So if you do have 50,000 issues you want to give to us all at once, maybe you want to do it that way, or maybe we want to just call ComicBase support and send us a spreadsheet or something. But we'll take it no matter how you do it. Okay, and let's see here. And then we also, speaking of spreadsheets, if you're importing from spreadsheets, something like Excel or something, imports got improved to do a better job of handling unrecognized titles. There were some issues depending on where Excel would put quotes and things like that in the whole thing. We do a nicer job of handling that. So those are all the things that are new in the program since last week. It's not a fascinating list, but yeah, for all the people who are interested in that sort of thing, that is the sort of thing you might be interested in. If you are interested in getting all the latest things that we do, let me go ahead and show this over on the other screen here, because now I can make sure that my web browser is working here. The place to get new information on all things ComicBase, ComicBase.com. If you want to see all the latest stuff of what we're doing, whenever you go under My Accounts and you download the latest copy of ComicBase from the registration screen, you're always going to get the very latest build. But the other thing you might want to do is, if you want to just check, what is the the latest information on what we're doing, come down here to the support menu under ComicBase.com and have a look at interim and testing builds. And as soon as my browser comes back, and that will list everything that's going on since we did it. I've probably beaten to death with everyone before. We don't push every build that we do. That isn't required to be downloaded when you do a check for updates. Those are only by default. You're only going to see our quarterly builds if you do a check for updates. But if you do like seeing everything that we do, go up under the preferences under here under setup in ComicBase, and bring the preference screen over to that one, and make sure you've check for interim updates. Then if you do a check for updates, then you'll see every single build that we do, and it'll be very exciting, I'm sure. All right, so with that said, let's see what else we got going on. Oh, let me also do a quick check of the chat and see if anything is popping. Happy Hump Day. Yes, it is indeed Hump Day. I gotta tell you guys, this is one where I'm gonna be happy to grab something cold and refreshing after this one. It's just been a day. All right. Oh, hey, Jerry from Seymour, Tennessee. I don't know where that is, man. Are you East, Middle, West? I've got to look that one up. Anyway, thank you for joining us. All right. So now let me see here, and I figured out a new one here. Hey, paste in a message for me, lol, for submitting my things. Yes, Andre, you're going to be the star of many a topic today, because yeah, we'll get to that in a minute here. All right, let's see here. Okay, and I found a new feature in our graphics package here where I can actually mark items that I want to get to later, and so they kind of stack things up, and I'll hit them as we go. All right, so basically, all right, I think we got it. All right, moving on. Okay, so so other than the new ComicBase stuff, I am going to be doing a lot of work on the next major version of ComicBase. There's as mentioned before, the big technical thing that we'll be doing on the new version of ComicBase is we're switching to full 64-bit, which means taking an awful lot of legacy database code out of the program so that we can use the full strength of 64-bit programming to handle larger data sets more easily and so forth. But that means we have to let go of some of the really old stuff. So a lot of the old conversion code that, for instance, that I was talking about, pulling old databases from ComicBase 2017 and earlier, that's going to get moved down to a separate converter program, and then we got to retool the rest to make the best use of everything we're doing. And then obviously there's a lot of work with Crystal Reports, our good buddy, there's a number of things that they were doing for 30-bit, 2-bit that they don't do for 64-bit, and vice versa, and it's always a joy to work with them, and so I'm gonna have a lot of fun with that. But the other thing that is worth mentioning in terms of just updates, Microsoft put up one this last week that is actually kind of significant. It comes in as KB 5011563. KB is for knowledge base, and if you're really, really, really bored, you can Google that up and look up that knowledge base number 5011563 on the Microsoft site, and it will tell you the full list of things that they are admitting to fixing in this one. My read as a geek on this one is that this is probably, either their monthly or their bi-monthly roll-up of all the fixes to Windows 11. Windows 11 being kind of a younger operating system for them is getting more fixes than you would otherwise think. Search indexing and alerts and a number of other things are getting retooled in a way that you may actually notice. And there's a non-zero chance that if you're having problems with your Windows setup, that this may actually set that to right. So do take a moment, go over to Windows Update on your computer at some point in the next day or two, download the new one, restart. It does take a little while to install. Yeah, I would say that's definitely one that you don't want to blow off. All right, let me do another quick check of the chat, and then we'll get back onto the topic du jour. All right. Okay, I got the one from Hacked, and ComicBase is losing the letter Q to make room. There's... I'll figure that one out. Okay. Yes, reading chats out loud. All right, so let's see. Well, actually, let me knock a couple of these off right away. So, Andre, yes, as you suspected, a lot of this shows for me. Andre, a great customer and contributor, has been doing a lot of indexing of the world's great newspapers and newspapers, magazines, and so forth. And so, dealing with things like the Financial Times or the New York Times and The Economist, things like that, things that have run tens, if not hundreds of thousands of issues over the course of their life. On one hand, I'm really excited to start getting that information into the database, especially when we can start throwing photo reference behind some of that, because I think it gives us a look at history in a way that we're just not used to seeing. Usually, we all have kind of like a day-to-day sense of our own life, span and the things that went on with it. We could probably tell you in great detail who was yelling about what at the Oscars, or what was going on in the or what was going on in the latest Twitter fights or things like that. That is the stuff that we have in mind as today's stuff. A lot of us comic book guys will remember the comic books that form everything from our youth to what we're reading today. But basically, the kind of like the sense of history that we can really feel, that really get the flavor of, is really kind of limited to our own lifespans, and really more of our adult lifespans for most of us. And a lot of us don't really have anything but kind of a dim memory of our own childhood. But then when you get to events that happened in the before, then it becomes this weird history book version of history, where it's we kind of have the big outline known, and we could probably say this event led to that event, and we have a general sense for what that did, but we really don't have a sense of the flavor of it all. But one thing I found is that when you start looking at the magazines that everyone was reading, or the newspapers on a day-to-day basis, it really makes that come to life in a way that is really unique. And it's really nice getting that sense. I mean, for instance, Adolf Hitler was in Time magazine 6 years, I believe, before he rolled tanks into Poland. And at that point, it was about, hey, Germany's brash new leader, can he turn the place around? It was only bit by bit that it became World War II. And the same thing goes for everyone else. Mussolini was in Time magazine, years before. And I believe one of the very first people on the cover of Time magazine was, it was one of the great German aviators. I could look it up if I go and pull up the covers. But if you just literally go down to Time magazine and ComicBase and just start clicking on covers year by year, it's amazing how much that brings that to life. So same thing goes when you start talking about daily newspapers. I'm really looking forward to the idea of not only the idea of like, okay, here's what the New York Times is saying today, or last week, or last year, or in 1984 when my favorite song came out, and how they were portraying the news and things like that. Things that you really have a pretty solid conception of how you feel about that day. How are they really being portrayed at the time? And for me at least, I find that the way they're portrayed at the time versus my own memory of them often differ starkly. But also when you compare different news sources, especially today, it feels like how the New York Times versus the Chicago Tribune refers to the exact same event might be completely night and day apart from each other, much less when you get into the starker, more partisan differences that we see today. By the way, there's a very funny Babylon Bee piece going around today. It was like 14 news sources in their headlines on the Will Smith slapping event at the Oscars, and it's just, man, it just nails how the different news outfits will characterize any type of story along that line. Anyway, do check that one out. If anyone's interested and you have trouble finding it, I'll try to dig up the link and put it in the show notes on this one. But anyway, I'm really looking forward to getting that level of magazines into the database, even if for most of them they're not so collectible. I mean, there are definitely people who will collect the newspaper on the the day they were born, or the magazine that came out, when they got married or something like that. I mean, that's always interesting from a time frame standpoint. I don't know that there's a lot of people who are sitting there looking for the November 12th, 1948 issue of the New York Times. I mean, I don't think that's a thing. It is interesting to see it, but I don't think, on a collector side that's super interesting. I mean, obviously there's, Pearl Harbor Day is going to be a huge issue. Man Lands on the Moon is going to be a huge, thing that if you happen to have the New York Times on those days, you could definitely make some money pawning it in if you somehow manage to keep it in good shape. But for me, honestly, I think it's going to be really interesting seeing the history of these ones. And that's something that, thanks to, again, Andre and his incredible amount of effort, indexing, at least doing the rough index on all these newspapers and magazines, it's going to be something that we can all look forward to. Now, a trick on this, on the other hand, is going to be that up until now, the largest thing that we'd had to deal with in terms of ComicBase was the title Commando. And then later on, the British Medical Journal somehow made its way into there. But I mean, you're talking about things with 8,000 entries in them, which, if you try to load them into a single list, can get a little clunky. We've done some things very recently to do some real hacks to speed up the display of those grids by many factors over. But there is a limit to what you can do. And at a certain point, you can, when you change the number of something, it really becomes a difference in kind, as far as a comic book with 12 issues just doesn't feel like a newspaper with 140,000 issues. I mean, the things that are very, nice and convenient and easy to get around with one type of thing really don't work for the other so much. And that definitely is adding a fair amount of work for us in terms of, whoa, what do we do when we're talking about a title that just merely displaying it or trying to add the issues to it so far stands at least a non-zero chance of blowing memory on people's 32-bit machines. Or for that matter, we found out when we were importing some of these test sheets, we would get to a point where we would import a 25,000 issue title, but then something was a little wrong. Let's try that again. When we'd go and highlight all 25,000 issues, we'd hit delete, and we'd realize that it would take 4 hours to delete the issues one by one, which, again, if with a title with 500 issues, it took seconds. But what was happening is, until the more recent version of ComicBase, is that the process for deleting an issue was, okay, for each of the issues, okay, delete that record in the database. Now, the hard part was updating the grid itself to say, okay, go down 25,000 lines in the grid, delete, delete the issue line, and then let the grid format itself and rearrange itself, moving all the lines either up or down one line, bit by bit, cell by cell. And again, if your grid has 300 items, and computers are very fast, and they can do this in less time than it takes to blink. But if you turn that from 300 to 100,000, then suddenly it reveals certain types of limits in the program. Like there's certain algorithms, like one of them is called the paint bucket problem. This comes from a joke from it's basically a dumb blonde joke. The idea was and insert your laugh character here. I mean, it could be whatever you want to put. Dumb blondes, people from Ohio, Tennesseans, whatever else. But the idea is one of these people gets hired for a job on the road crew, and they say, all right, well, your job here is to paint the white line on the whole thing. Here's your bucket of paint. Here's your brush, and honestly, we're pretty happy if you paint a mile worth of road in a day. We got a lot of road here, so let's get to it and hit it. So the person goes, and the first day they're like, they check in at the end of the day, and the road crew guy's amazed. It's like, quota was was 1 mile a day, but they got 2 miles done. It's like, well done, you really really put on the speed. Really proud of you. All right, we'll see you tomorrow. Pays them off, comes back the next day, and next day checks in how the progress went at the end of the day, and I said, well, you only got 1 mile done today, but you're still a quota. That's fine. See you tomorrow. Okay, pays them off. Next day, it's down to person only got a half mile done in the whole day, and then they say, well, let's have a little talk here. What's going on with your performance? And the person says, well, I'm working hard, boss. I mean, it's just at this point, the paint's really far from the brush now, and I got to keep walking back and forth all the time to reload my brush. Joke being that, again, that's why it's typically told as like a dumb blonde joke, or a, Okie from whatever, Muskogee joke, or whatever else is like, take the damn bucket with you. Otherwise it takes forever to keep on going back and reloading. Well, anyway, there's a number of things in computer programming that work under the same principles as the paint bucket joke. One of them, for instance, is, let's say your algorithm for taking a very long list. Where just any list is, say, okay, if I'm going to delete the 10th item in the list, and there's 1,000 items in the list, what that does is delete item number 10, and then take number 11, make it number 10, make number 12, make it number 11, make number 13, make it number 12. Go all the way down the list, shuffle. When that's done, you're done, right? And again, that works great if there are 300 items in your list. That's only one shuffle. But if you make it 100,000 items in the list, that shuffle you do after just deleting one item, suddenly it takes exponential time as the number of items in your list grow, because there's that shuffle that happens every single time. So one of these things that we're really stressing on, or that we've discovered, is beyond certain limits, we have to be very, very careful that there aren't hidden components in the program. For instance, we don't actually tell our list how to delete items. It's just the grid that Microsoft created for displaying items in the database. It determined that by itself, but it's revealed to us, because we can watch how the behavior changes as you do different things, that it's basically got a paint bucket problem built into the grid in terms of deleting items. So what we have to do now, because we can see the effect of it being slow, we're now the road boss, and we can tell that that's how they're attacking that problem, in the code we can't see. I mean, but because the performance characteristics go to hell when you really load up the item, then we have to start realizing, okay, how do we help the grid component, or how do we help the database do things that work more efficiently when you deal with very large items? And so that's been a lot of our challenge right now. All right, let me do a quick check of the chat here, because I've been babbling on for a bit. Let's see here. Andre says, oh my god, Peak speaks French now. God, I hope not. Okay, let's see here. Thomas says, great example of clicking through history with the mag covers. Can we make a way to arrow through the full-size cover pictures? Maybe? I wonder how that would work exactly. I'm not sure what the mechanic is on that exactly. But we should look into that. We used to have a thing in ComicBase, older versions of it, which we basically stole the trick from Minority Report. If you guys remember the trick, the movie Minority Report with Tom Cruise. Let me go ahead and see if I can show it. Let me go to a larger title here. Put on my key again. But there was a scene in the Tom Cruise movie Minority Report where Cruise goes and wants to get the room listing for somebody, and he basically the guy says, well, let me see the register, and the guy says, nah, I can't see the register. He takes his gun out, spins on the counter, and he goes like, here you go, you see the register. But because this was all very cool future tech and everything, they had an effect that the graphics people for the studio had whipped out for how you might look down a hotel register, and it involved taking your hand out. And I'll put myself in here so I can actually see the arm movement, but taking your hand out and slowly waving it down the list like that, and all the names and faces, all the people in the different rooms would just pop into view, hung right where the hand was at the time. And I remember just thinking, like, that is just the coolest thing ever. I totally want to steal that trick. And we stole that trick to use comic covers. So what we had at the time was you would hover your mouse over a comic cover, and if you hesitated for, it was like 3/4 of a second, it would zoom up to mid-size, and if you kept it held there for another half a second, it would zoom up to full size. But then at that point, you could take your mouse and move down the line slowly like this, and all the comic covers would just flicker into view like that. And I really love the effect. There was a lot of really interesting timings on it that were just really interesting for us to try to get right. It was technically interesting. The effect was really nice. And the reason we left it is because touchscreens and tablets came along. And suddenly anything that was driven by the idea of hovering a mouse over something doesn't work anymore. And so in order to make that work anymore, we really had to have something that works when you actually click on something. You can't assume there's anything that's hovering over it, because tablets at the moment don't have the idea of a hover, because you don't almost touch your tablet. You have to actually put your finger down someplace, and maybe you scroll down with your finger. That could be a thing, but there actually has to be a tap. So when you do have the idea like that, it would be interesting. Like, I don't know. I mean, how do you guys feel about down arrow or right arrow to be able to go on down to the next full size cover as we go? I mean, I don't have a problem with that if you guys think that would be discoverable. You certainly can go down once you set the selection and view things this way, and if you are of a mind to, you could grab from this middle area here and make the top part very large indeed. Click at the far left hand, and then I'm just using the down arrow here right now, and then that shows each of the covers in turn. Is that a suitable approximation? Would you guys want to see just the cover? Yeah, right back in the chat, let me know. But that's an interesting idea. I'd love to have something that works like that, but I gotta. Yeah, it's one of those things that kind of went away with modern tablets, and I wouldn't mind bringing something like that back. Thanks for the suggestion. All right, let me see what else we got going on here. Let's see here. Let's see. Okay, Andre says, the biggest newspaper so far got the Wall Street Journal, close to 90,000 issues. Good grief. And yeah, but you're not fooling me, man. I know there's larger ones coming. Oh, and I like how right now my face is being obscured by the whole thing. So I'm just gonna cut back to camera one. Hell with that. Okay. All right. Oros asks, where will the front pages of newspapers come from? Who is a broadsheet scanner? New York Times is selling its front pages. Copyright problems? I don't think so. Typically, all this stuff is pretty nicely under fair use. It is a reason that we are not selling these at print quality, among other things. But all these things are also found in the Library of Congress. That's that's typically where we're able to source magazine covers or very old newspaper covers and so forth. But yeah, we do the things you typically need for fair use on these things. As far as issuing proper copyright credit, we're only showing a very small portion of the whole thing, and it is done for comment and editorial use. So we're pretty clear on that one. Editorial use, unfortunately, is not it's not what the legal guys call an affirmative defense. The only time you really know that you've held up under fair use is when someone sues you because they claim you didn't and you successfully defend. That said, our long-standing policy with ComicBase is, first of all, if we have any questions at all about these things, we always ask first. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of permissions agreements that we spent years getting signed from all the major comics publishers, to get the cover usage that we have. But if someone like the New York Times wants to say, hey, don't use our covers, you know what? if you really feel hard that way, then I think there's a very good chance that we would not use, show your covers even with copyright. But cross that bridge when we come to it. But honestly, I don't anticipate a lot of issue with that. All right, so back to some other questions. I'm trying to use a new feature with the software that I'm looking at right now for doing the graphics here, where I can actually pull off things that I want to hit to talk about and not hit them necessarily at the same time. So that's when that's why I'm noting things in my list here. All right, so Gregory asks, is it possible to import from a spreadsheet into an existing ComicBase database that has inventory in it? I've only done it into a brand new empty database. Yes, you can do that. It's actually the standard way that it would work. Typically what I would suggest is, let's say you have a spreadsheet of, these are the comics that my friend just gave me, and I want to incorporate them into my collection. Or you would also use this kind of thing if you wanted to export data from two databases and import it into a single database. Basically, you want to get a text file, which the easiest way to do that is if you are in Excel or something like that. I'm going to say this is even easier than doing a save as text because it involves less weird formatting characters. Is basically just highlight the rows in the spreadsheet that you want to to carry over. Hit Control-C, copy. And the way that Excel does that is it puts it all into a tab delimited format, which, as it turns out, is perfect. You don't need to do a dang thing with it. It's absolutely perfect for importing into ComicBase. Open up a text editor, hit paste, hit file, save as, save it as a text file, and then at that point you say import. In ComicBase, you go to the database that you'd like to integrate the data into, and let me go ahead and show this. And you would just come up under here, under the file menu, say import. I'm going to choose a text field of some sort. I think I must have one somewhere around here. Show notes. Well, okay, this won't really work, but I'm going to do it, I'll do it anyway. You need to find a text field. But typically what you would do is you would then say, all right, what are, it'll show you a preview of the first field. Now, in this one, there are no real, things, but typically you see things like Action Comics #1, near mint, it cost me $3.50, and whatever the notes were. That would be a typical spreadsheet you'd be importing. And what your job here is in the import dialog is you just match up what the fields are that you're importing with the records that you're seeing across here, get them in the right order, hit import, bam, blast everything in. If it's a brand new title, it'll come in as a new title. It'll say by an unknown publisher. If it is a known title, especially if it's a known issue, it's going to add to the quantity of that issue. If there's an issue in the same grade existing already, and by the same title, it'll just add one to the quantity. And if it's in a different condition or it's a different title, it'll just become a new record in the database. But you can import that stuff in. I would probably make a backup of my database before I did that, just in case I want to go back. But yeah, no, it's pretty straightforward, and we do all the time here at ComicBase, just to move things around. All right, let's turn off the key. Come on, you can do it. There we go. All right, moving on. Let me see here. Where's my mouse? All right. All right, so okay, okay, and we asked about the importing of that stuff. Was anything else in the chat I missed? I don't think so. Okay, cool. All right, so let's talk about stressors. Oh no, now the key came back. Ha ha ha. So stressors for ComicBase, and let me go ahead and pull up my notes for things that we found that broke when we started loading in, 50,000 issues of a single title, and things that didn't. Okay, so the good news is, so when we first started trying to incorporate some of Andre's data, which I think we're suspecting could wind up being just hundreds and hundreds of thousands of issues when it's all said and done. So one thing that I was immediately worried about, because 64-bit versus 32-bitness had been on my mind for a while, is how much can you possibly load up before you blow memory? Because when you are looking at a grid of, like if we were looking over here, this is called the grid, right? So for as many rows as you have right here, times as far as you make this thing go to the right, all that data is in memory at a given time. So again, for the kind of things that we have in comic books, you think, okay, there might be 70, there might be 70 things available, showing here, including all these pictures. But if it's a few thousand rows, nobody worries about running out of memory. But what if it's 100,000 rows? At that point, it's like, uh-oh, could we be running out of what a 32-bit computer could hold and still run? The answer is so far is not yet, but asterisk, get back to me on that a little bit, because there are definitely things that cause it stress. I mentioned, for instance, inserting or removing rows. Until we did some major surgery with that, with the paint bucket problem that we found, it was painfully slow. One thing, for instance, we handle this problem here at ComicBase Central with corrections. So when you guys submit new data to us, sometimes we'll come in on Monday morning and there'll be 12,000 new submissions for us in the corrections queue. And even if we're just pounding through them very quickly, the mere time it used to take us just to update that list, all right, so we handled correction number 1, now it takes number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and shuffles all them up by one. We used to bring, once upon a time, we used to bring back all the items at once, and it might take 5 seconds between items before, the editor could even go on to the next item. That was just painful, and we learned over time, as long as we got that underneath 1,000, it was basically as fast as we could possibly look as far as how quickly it would update the list and move us on to the next one. So 1,000 seems like our sweet spot between being able to see as much data as we can and having noticeable lags and everything. And you guys might want to look into controlling your own list behaviors. If you find some of the larger lists are kind of funky, have a look under Setup, go down to Preferences, and there's an item down here for rows to display in grid view. I've currently got that set to 10,000, which on this new computer with the improvements we've recently put in is a pretty comfortable number for me. You can go all the way up to 100,000. So if you're feeling daring and, you happen to have 100,000 items of something, we think most of you will be okay if that happens. But if your computer locks up, it runs out of memory, back it off one. But 10,000 is actually pretty comfortable, even on 32 bits. Like I say, it doesn't have. If you have it set to 10,000, you won't go to any comic title and ever need to scroll. I'm sorry, you will never need to page to the next page, because all the results will be shown in one. What it'll do if you have more. Let me shoot this to a lower number, like 1,000. Now let me go to a very long title. If you set that to a smaller number and you go to a very long title, like let's go to Action Comics here, what it will do is it'll bring back the first 1,000 results. You'll see down at the bottom it'll say one of 1,000, 1 through 1,000 of 1,311. So what I'd have to do is, if I want to play around with all the ones there, that's not a problem. If I want to see the next, pages after issue 866, I guess there were variants and different printings, then I just hit the forward and back buttons over here, and it goes forward or back, by 1,000 in the results set. So that's the way it handles very, very large data sets right now, and still keeps everything very fast. But with the various latest versions, at least on my machine, I find that 10,000 is pretty comfortable to run around with. I don't know if it's going to hold up so much with the very big numbers. I haven't had the very big numbers to play with yet, but that's going to happen. So we're going to find out. But at some point, you will find out that there is a number at which there are noticeable lags on things that are. It's worse for you suffering those lags than it is having the convenience of seeing everything all on one page. So set that on your computer. Everyone's going to be a little different. Set that to taste and go accordingly. Now, one thing I'd say here is I've been talking about the grid so far, and the grid does a good job with this stuff. Is again, these things, they're built out of spreadsheets. They're meant to be efficient from the word go. A lot of time and engineering has gone into making these really, really efficient from a computer standpoint. Less efficient by a lot is the album view. Now, the album view is pretty. I love the album view, but the album view is markedly slower to draw versus the grid view for large things. And you'll notice that, for instance, my album view by default, I'm only showing 100 items at a time, because it needs to, for every item in the album view, it needs to go pull up the picture, size it up there, throw it in the middle of the thing, lay the grid components out next to each other, properly. There's a lot of geometry to this that doesn't exist in the grid view. And even though we're doing a lot of hacky stuff to make this as fast as humanly possible, it gets bogged down. On my computer, if I go show more than about 300-400 in an album view, it will noticeably slug down to the point where I'm like, I'm not sure if I really want to see it in this view or if I really want to see that many. Now, one thing that's kind of cool, and I'll tell you about this one here, is when you're trying to figure out what the rows display are in album view, the default is a setting called auto. And what that does is it starts in kind of the middle someplace. Like, let's say we said 500. It figures out on your computer how long it took to show those 500 items. And if it's more than, and I forget what it was, I want to say something like 5 seconds, then bit by bit, 100 by 100, it scales it down until it can show the results in under 5 seconds. And as you see right now on this particular thing with the graphics I've got set up there, it's obviously taking quite a while to relay this out, showing 500 items at once. Because for all those ones, like I say, there's a lot. I mean, I had to do the picture loads on everything. Now, one kind of hack that we do, it's called lazy loading, which is pretty cool, is that, the 500th element in here, even though it took a fair amount of time doing the geometry of these boxes, the graphics itself don't get loaded until they're on screen. So, up until the moment that you are, getting ready to display something, these things don't actually exist in memory. We're using all the hacks at our disposal to make this fast, but the album view is, again, it's pretty, but it's noticeably slower than grid view. So, like I say, for me personally, I tend to prefer the album view for things like books, where I really like seeing the covers. I don't have that many to show at any given time. Matter of fact, for my own collection, I use the album view, showing all my books, showing all the titles at once. And so it's just like looking through all, it's like looking through my bookshelf all at once. That's not a bad way to go. But when you get to these larger data sets, switch to grid view, I would definitely say. And also have a look at the size of the item that you're using here. So when we look at, say, the grid cover icon size, by default, that's 48. Now, I can make this as big as I want. I can, let me bump it to 128 right now. And as soon as it relays out this, this grid here, you'll realize that it will show everything much larger as soon as it gets done. I, of course, had to show this on Action Comics. My next demo is going to be on something more like, I don't know, Batman and Robin 3rd series, because at that point, it just had to more or less recreate this entire thing, load all new thumbnails for all the cells and so forth. Again, this is pretty, but all that prettiness comes at a cost in terms of time. So do consider adjusting the grid cover size. 48 tends to be big enough to make it so you can see at a glance what cover you're probably talking about from the little thumbnail, and you don't need to spend a lot of time scrolling up and down. That would be, I would say use the standards, vary on them bit by bit until you find something you're comfortable with. But when in doubt, the standard size is usually a pretty good bet on that one. All right. Let me see what other things that wound up being interesting. So as far as being able to have people just incorporate the items in an update, this was something that was a real cause of concern for me. Is I worried that, well, what happens if we push 200,000 new items out in 1 week? Oh, by the way, I got to show you this because this is just nuts to me. This is, we have a little brag box that we show sometimes for our come on, I can think. For our newsletters. This is the stats for the 3rd update that we put out last week. Yes, we had 3 updates last week. 62,797 new issues, 26,304 price and issue changes, 3,766 new covers. And this is in 1 week, folks. This is nuts. Over 6,000 comics, and that magazine total, don't be surprised if that doesn't go into 7 digits sometime relatively soon. So we were very concerned, well, gosh, the last thing we want to do is push down so many new items that someone coming in and needing to add all those to their database is going to blow memory, even comparing the data sets. We did a little stress testing on that one with different sets. Good news, we found to our great relief, is we're nowhere near blowing memory on those. The database operations we do as far as running the updates are efficient enough that, yeah, it's not going to cause any technical problems for anybody. So we are going to be seeing, I gave the content guys the go-ahead to ramp up, pushing, I think it was, I had them do over 100,000 of Andre's things this week, or close to 100,000 this week, and we'll ramp it up until we exhaust his data set. We were risking there for a while, because the initial thought is, well, let's release 10,000 of the, every week of the data that he's doing, and then he pointed out that it was going to take us something like 5 years to put the whole data set out, and at that rate, and I was like, well, we're going slow, we'll see if we can ramp it up. But yeah, it looks like we can ramp it up much more than that quite safely, so we will be doing that. So look for this week's update to be kind of a doozy, but anyway, once it's in, it goes fast, so that part's good. Let me do a quick check of chat here, because again, I've been babbling for a while. I want to make sure I'm not losing stuff here. All right. Oh, Andre says, I'm set up to 100K. It works not so bad. Sometimes I get out of memory. 64 gigs of RAM. Yeah, and the problem you've got with that is, even though you're on 64 gigs of RAM, because ComicBase is currently a 32-bit application, you can't use those 64 gigs of RAM. You can only at any given moment use 2 gigs of them, because that's the upper end of what a 32-bit application can address. As soon as we go to full 64-bitness, at that point, if it's marginal at 100,000 issues, then it won't be any problem whatsoever, because all we gotta do, I mean, honestly, if we got 1 more gig of your memory that everyone's already got on their computers, if we can get that 1 more gig just into the game, then we can handle any data set for anything that we're even contemplating showing ever. So we're looking forward to that, but we have to we have to deal with that for now. And as I'm scrolling down, it's like, yes, I see that once again Steve has answered the same question just as just like that, but more efficiently. So again, welcome, Steve. Great having you. All right, so let's see here. Andre also points out the updates will be a bit longer with all the issues. Yeah, the physical time to download the update is a bit longer. Magazine loading is faster than comic loading, because we don't need to parse nearly as many fields as we're loading in new things. And also at this point in time, we don't have nearly as much data in the magazines. So, if I'm looking at the New York Times on, December 7th, 1927 or something, unlike comic books right now, we don't have the artist and writer for every story in the dang thing like we do for comics. So there isn't nearly as much data to parse, and so you'll notice actually as we're downloading updates that comic books tick by the 5,000, and all books and magazines tick by the 10,000, and because we want something where the counter as you're downloading the update kind of goes like, like that kind of rhythm, and that was the difference in real time on our test machines between those two. So yeah, if we take the magazines, we go from 200,000 to 500,000. Honestly, it's not even going to make an extra minute on people's updates. So it should be just fine. All right, so I think we covered those ones here. All right, I'm going to take these guys out of my queue, and we're good to go. Hey, wow, if I had my dream here, if you guys can't see, my other screen on this one, but as chats were coming in, what I would adore more than anything is if I had a producer who could just take things that relate to ComicBase TV, swoop them over into my pending queue so I could address them all at once, but instead I have to sort of scan down, and that's why it's so important that you guys put that at ComicBase TV so I can see where we're going. So very much appreciate all you guys for doing that. All right. So just to recap, so the sheer number of magazines turns out not such a big deal. Do watch the size of your grid, and do switch from album view to grid view if you haven't already when you're going to deal with very big things. We've done a lot of stuff with the inserting and the removing of items to make it so that that's not nearly as painful anymore. Realistically, what we really do is we figure out if you've got more than, I think it's 300 items in your grid view that we're looking at, it's faster for us rather than deleting a single line and letting everything scroll up, it's actually faster for us to delete that row, redo the search results, splat that back into a grid again, and let it go, than it is to let that shuffle occur. So that's what the new versions of ComicBase do, and the same thing goes on inserting new data. For downloading updates, not so bad, but other things that we've discovered. Submitting new data to us. Now, I had said in the past that it was reliant on the length of an HTTP post request, and as it turns out, my thinking was out of date on that. Having done more digging into it at this point, we actually are posting, when you submit new corrections to us, like if I come up over here and I switch to Action Comics and I say, I'm gonna take all these guys, or even select all, and then say submit new or corrected data. What it does actually, after a little bit of initial setup work, is it basically logs in and gets a token on our server, so they can start talking and talking to our correction server, and then just issue by issue it just goes, all right, here's issue 1 data, here's issue 2 data, here's issue 3's data. Make sure that it gets a good response after each one, and it will go through the entire set like that. There's other than the sheer number of data that's on the clipboard at the time, there's not really a memory consideration on that one, and there isn't really a problem with the sending, and it'll even draw the appropriate progress bars and so forth to show you that I'm sending 7,000 items to us all at once, because it just does one after another in a big chain. Now, there isn't really a problem with that so much. We did fix very recently a couple little glitchy edge cases on the whole thing, and more importantly, we made it so that it does a better job of handling error conditions, transient errors, like your Wi-Fi connection just got a little weird on you for a second, or there was a picture that didn't want to post or something like that. It does a better job of that, so that part's not so bad. We can handle the sheer amount of data, no problem. I will say though that the length of time is required just to do, if you're going to send us 25,000 things at once, just going and say, here's issue number 1, send it to the server, get the authentication back there, and say, did that process right? Yes, it did. Send number 2. That round trippiness going back and forth there, when you start talking tens of thousands of items, it's not great. If you're doing it once ever, then I guess, hit Control A, say submit new or corrected data, go out and have dinner. I mean, you could do that, but realistically, if you find for some reason that's something you want to do, reach out to us on support@comicbase.com, and probably the more efficient way to do it is to have us load that into an offline spreadsheet and just transmit the whole spreadsheet and let us bulk load it in once we have a chance to look at it. There's just one. It's just a much more efficient way to move data, because there isn't all the internet traffic overhead of encapsulating it. It's called serializing the data, deserializing, and so forth. There's a lot less round trippiness if you just at some point just send us a file. So if you do get into that situation for some reason, reach out to us, support@comicbase.com. We'll make that happen. And very much we appreciate Andre's efforts. That's how we're trading these massive data sets these days. I want to say we had to give Andre a credit for like 158,000 submissions this last week. So if you see him racing up the points board, that you will know why. All right, let me do a quick check of the chat, see how we're doing, and then we'll talk a little bit about computer optimization. Greg wants to remind everyone, don't forget we do have a comic-based message board, so you can request live stream topics and so forth. So please do that. We'll be talking about some other things in later shows that people have suggested. We'll be doing proper theme shows on those. I got to get a little bit of setup time in to make a couple of those work, but we are hearing your topics, and if we haven't addressed them yet, by all means, feel free to ping us. But some of these things require so much setup to talk intelligently about, or to demo the things we want to demo about them. It's really works better if we put them off just a little bit. There's some things about Atomic Avenue in particular. All right, so other things that I want to hit. So when you're talking about making your own computer run faster, so those are all the things we found. We're just kind of like, okay, they're causing some drama for us here at ComicBase. If you take what it was doing comfortably and you times 10 it or times 50 it. But let's talk about your own computer. I would say if I was recommending to all of you, what's the computer you should be using right now to run ComicBase? So ComicBase is, it's a database, which means that it cares mostly about your disk. Your disk is absolutely number one on the list of things that's going to be slowing you down. Followed by number two, if you make sure you have enough RAM. Enough RAM in this case is 8 gigabytes for Windows, ComicBase, and everything else that's running on your computer. Which, if you guys have any doubts about that, at some point go into Task Manager. And let me show this on this screen right now. So go down to your Start menu, type TASKMGR, and that'll bring up the Windows Task Manager. Let me bring this over on the whole thing. And you sit there and think, I'm looking at my computer right now, and I've got 4 or 5 programs open. That's what I think I have open. Task Manager will tell you that your computer is lying to you, or either that or it's doing a lot of sneaky things to you didn't know. So the real number of programs I have open is well over 100. There's the browser, there's Dropbox running, there's an indexer, there's ComicBase, there's etc. You go down here, and then you'll also discover, if you scroll down, all the other processes that are running. And you'll find out it's not uncommon at all for you to be running 150 things at the same time. That's just the way that multi-threaded operating systems work in this day and age. It is frightening how much stuff you got going on your machine at any given time. But Task Manager is the very first tool I would suggest to anyone who says, wow, my computer's running slow, I wonder why. Either go to your Start menu, type TSKMGR, or hit Control-Alt-Delete, and that'll bring up a little window that lets you click to get the Task Manager. Once that happens, if your computer's just slow on you, first thing to do is look at these numbers right at the top. All right, this tells you what percentage of my CPU is busy right now, what percentage of my memory is in use, the disk, the network, and GPU. All right, I'll tell you right now, when we see people who call us up with performance issues on their they say, hey, my computer's running super slow, what's going on? It is always either CPU bound or disk bound. That's, with databases, that's always what you're waiting for, is one of those two. Now, memory, 42%. Sounds like I'm using a lot of my RAM right now. Don't worry about that at all. Windows is designed right now to cache a lot of stuff to load more stuff than it needs to into memory and keep it around longer than it needs to have it there, so that it can pull it up again quickly if it needs to. Because the things that's really slow is getting stuff off of your disk and loading it into RAM, or getting it shoveled back and forth to, between your RAM and your CPU. Those are where the real load times are on your thing. And in order to keep that from happening a lot, if it thinks it might need the same data anytime soon, Windows will keep it around as long as you've got a comfortable amount of RAM kicking around to do that. So don't be afraid when your memory looks pretty taxed, unless you're at 100%. But if you're anywhere south of 85, you're fine. Windows is just doing its thing, and adding more RAM probably won't help you. But when you look up here, if your CPU says, hey, I'm running 100% CPU, at that point you'll notice that you can't move your mouse very much. Everything just feels like it locks. Your screen updates about every 10 seconds. What I would do is, next time you get any kind of controller of your computer, click over here right where that CPU does, and what does, it sorts the list by what apps are using your CPU the most. Look for the thing that's grabbing all your time, and in this case you'll notice the Microsoft Windows Search Indexer is grabbing 10% of my CPU right now. So I'm running a podcast right now, and the background search indexer, which has nothing to do with anything, is occupying more of my CPU than anything else. It's occupying more than ComicBase, it's occupying more than the video streaming services, more than the graphics. So this stupid dang thing is actually eating the most of my CPU. Now, it's still, as much as it's grabbing 10%, so I'm not that concerned. But if that was at 90%, that's what you got to watch out for, is these guys here. The other one to look for is disk. So if you click over here on disk, it'll give you a clue on what are the things that are burning the most of your disk. Now, this gets a little bit trickier because you'll notice if you're completely disk bound, and it's not uncommon to see people who have 100% disk going, and so everything they're doing is waiting for their disk to be done with something. And at the same time, you'll see that they're not moving a lot of data at once. I mean, they're still running 0.1 megabits per second, or sometimes you see kilobits per second, but their disk is 100% occupied. If that happens to you, click on the second tab that says Performance, and that lets you dial in a little bit more into what is going on your machine. So for instance, let's say disk 1 had been completely, let's see, disk 2, my C drive is running at 2% capacity, but let's say this is 100% capacity. At that point, it would give you an idea of which of your disks, if you have more than one, is causing your trouble. But then it also gives you a link down here to a thing called the resource monitor. If you click on him, it'll launch a separate program here. And I realize this might seem like it's getting a little bit into the weeds. I'll come out in a second. But if you go back over the disk again, if you click on that guy and you sort by the reads per second or the writes per second, you'll start seeing which applications are the ones that are doing you in. And so you can find out what exactly they're doing that is using all your disk speed. And at that point, then you can drill in on where the real performance problems on your system are. What I'd say from just doing tech support is typically the ones that we find that are just burying people. If people call up and say, look, my machine's running like a dog, it was fine before, and then we installed your new version, or whatever the thing is that made them blame us, it calls. But you sit there and you say, well, what the problem is, and typically one of two things is happening. The most common one is they've got antivirus software that's going nuts on them. If you look in your task manager and you're running something like Norton, you will probably see something like 7 or 8 different processes that are Norton something or other that are running at any given time. And if you have the real-time virus scanning going, or some of the different, there's an infinite numbers of security bits that can be going at a given moment. They can exert just a tremendous load on your machine. My guideline I would say for anyone, if your friend is say, look, don't let your antivirus software be as bad as having a virus. So, whatever you're using, if it's taking your machine out worse than a virus would take your machine out, get rid of that, find a better program. Now, we don't make official recommendations. I will say, however, what we use inside the human computing offices here, after having tried them all, is we use the one that's built into Windows. It's called Windows Defender. It satisfies my most important criteria, which is it's not as bad as having a virus itself. But at the same time, they have virus shootouts with like PC Magazine and things like that, where they'll take known viruses and they'll infect computers with them, and they'll see which of the programs can detect and eliminate the viruses, get the most of them and remove them the most effectively. Windows Defender regularly wins those shootouts. The lowest I've ever seen it go in recent years has been number 2. But typically it'll be the one that wins. It's free, so you're not paying for it, and it runs pretty efficiently almost all the time. In other words, it doesn't bog your machine down to death. That's going to be the one that, you can use what you like, but that's the one we use. But whatever you're using, make sure you know how to turn it off. Once you've turned it off, don't be surprised if you check in Task Manager and you find out that even you said turn yourself off, that it still has 6 processes running and they're all eating 60% of your CPU. That kind of lying to you is unfortunately typical in the antivirus business. So that would be the very first thing I'd worry about, is if your disk or your CPU are just getting hammered for no reason, is have a look at your virus, your security software. That's usually, I'm going to say 6 times out of 10. That's where the problem winds up lying. The other times, is typically if you have a very, very slow disk, particularly if you have a failing disk, that can do you in. If you do have like a really old, an old school magnetic drive thing as your main C drive, at least on your next computer, swear you will get yourself an SSD. I've been banging on about this for years. I was just looking at them before showtime, and you can get 1 terabyte NVMe SSDs. These are the crazy fast ones that go, a couple thousand megabytes per second. You can get those for $80 now. There is no excuse not to have an SSD in your computer these days. If you want to have a hard drive, for deep storage, for like backing up video files, totally understandable. But at least for your primary drive, get yourself an SSD. Ideally, get yourself an NVMe. I can't talk today, guys. NVMe SSD, which is that's the kind of looks like a little stick. It looks like almost like a RAM stick, but it plugs into a special slot inside modern computer motherboards or on laptops. It's mounted directly on the motherboard. It works over what's called the PCI Express bus. As a result, it can move data way faster than just faster than anything except maybe your graphic card. Slower, older school SSDs, if you want to have your older computer retrofitted with one, they're about the size of, think about the form factor of a pack of cards, but then cut the thickness in half. That's about what you're dealing with as far as what the size is on those. Those will typically mount in a ATA bay, and they're about 2.5 inches. I want to say 2.5 inches wide. But those will fit in basically every computer known to man, and those also are very cheap. The only downside of those is they hook in over what's called SATA, SATA, and that interface pegs out at 6 megabits per second, so you can't hit those kind of crazy speeds that the really good SSDs can hit. It's still likely going to be 20 times faster than your existing mechanical hard drive, so take the win. But if you can get an SSD, or you're thinking of one for Christmas, get one now. You will not regret it. And buy one that's a little bigger than you think. Typically, the prices will go, you're going to wind up paying about, basically you're going to pay about $100 per terabyte on an SSD, but you'll get most of the bang out of that first terabyte. If you're still using a mechanical one, get yourself a terabyte one. Don't look back. Anyway, that would be my strong advice on that score. Other things that I would say look into if they're just burning up your disk speed. OneDrive is a real culprit. Microsoft OneDrive. What that one does, ironically, after I just got told you, done telling you that all the things that slow you down, it's always about your CPU or your disk, OneDrive will be the one that blows away your network, because every time you're using it, especially if you're using it with ComicBase active, it's constantly trying to back up these 1 terabyte ComicBase database files up to your network connection. And not really letting go of things until it's done syncing. And depending on what your network's uplink speed is, backing up 1 terabyte a file to your network could be easily 8 minutes. And if it's doing that every single time you touch the database, that's not going to be a happy situation. So have a look if you're using OneDrive. If you are using OneDrive, for God's sake, don't let it manage your active ComicBase folder. That is a terrible idea. Let it manage your ComicBase backups folder, sure, that's not a problem, but get it, keep it away from your ComicBase database folder for sure. And just make sure that you're not file syncing your way into doom. And then the last thing I'd say is there is an off chance that you have an actual virus, but more likely than that, you could just literally have a failing disk. And the way you'd find out whether you have a failing disk or not is going to a tool called the Event Viewer. Now, I'll show it very briefly, but I'm going to warn you, this gets cryptic fast. I'm going to go up here, I'm going to type Event Viewer. Unfortunately, it's on the screen, you can't see. And I believe I had this up here earlier with a failed disk, or a disk that's failing showing in here, so when it gets done actually loading, that might actually be something we see. Anyway, when you look at the Event Viewer, get ready for just geekdom overload, because it's going to want to launch into the basic view where it here's the list of all the errors, warnings, informations, and audit successes that have happened on your computer in the last hour, day, or so forth. Pay a lot of attention to the errors down here, and these are the things that are really jamming up your computer. If you see any of these ones down here that say anything about a disk, pay very close attention, because typically what that'll mean is that your disk itself is starting to fail. You do not want this. You do not want this in the worst possible way. If your disk is failing, get your data off it as soon as possible. If you can check your disk and scan and isolate the error, it's okay to use it for a little bit longer, but start thinking about getting your data onto another disk ASAP. Typically what disks will do is they will fail for a while. They'll start having trouble writing sectors, and they'll try again and again and again, which is why it takes forever to write even small files. Or if if they have bad sectors that data's been written to already, they might try to read it about 50 different times before they finally get the sector image that in a way that checksums out. But it will degrade the performance horribly, but then that's followed by absolutely failing, and absolutely failing is when you lose all your stuff. So don't wait around for that sort of thing. Do get yourself onto a different disk. If you start seeing disk event errors in the event log, get those handled right away. All right. So I think that's about it for that I want to see. I think let me do a quick check of the check. I thought I saw some other stuff come in real quickly. Okay, Ed asks, do I watch any comic book related channels on YouTube? Which ones do I watch? Atomic Avenue got shout out March 11th episode of Bronze Modern Gods on YouTube. Oh, sweet. That's excellent. Big fan of Nerdrotic. I watch, a lot of times I'll have the Friday night tights going, whether it's really on Friday nights or whether I catch it over the weekend. It's just a live stream thing. It's just, honestly, it's a guy named Gary Buechler who used to run a comic shop in San Francisco where, I was, that area I was from for a great many years. But he's basically got his friends, they hang out, they jabber about comic-related geekdom for hours and hours and hours, and it's kind of like hanging out at comic shops. It reminds me of that a lot. Yeah, that's one I try to catch pretty frequently. It's good for keeping up on comic-related trivia. As far as like straight up comic stuff, that's probably the most consistent one I do. There are other ones I kind of dip in and out of, but it really depends on what's going on in the world, back and forth. But I'll throw one out there. We'll call it a win for that one. Slider69 says, I've won the product for over a year, been waiting to put a few boxes of comics in here with a scanner. Is there anyone anywhere it shows a good way to do this? As far as the how to do it with a scanner, I believe we've got videos out on that. If we don't, certainly be glad to do it. By the way, we're still waiting on arrival of our new resupply of scanners. But if you're looking for just a tutorial on how to do it, have a look at go to our scanner page and just look at the demo of how the scanners work. That's kind of the shtick. Also, if you go to the ComicBase YouTube page, and there's a video there called Pro Tips Number 1. It's a number of years old, but the basics all still apply. And it's 6 quick ways of entering your collection fast. And I believe number 6 was doing it with a barcode scanner. So have a look at that one and see if that doesn't help you out. If your scanner's configured properly, it's literally a matter of just going add by inventory, add by barcode, Control I, and just go beep, 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 with the scanner, and as fast as you can scan them, they're queued up for entry. So it's a pretty quick way to go if your books have barcodes and your scanners, is correctly configured. The latter part is typically the sticking point if you're just getting a third-party scanner, because a lot of scanners will not get all the digits. Particularly, they won't get the smaller digits to the far right by default. They kind of catch them as can catch. And with periodicals, those last 5 digits, if you look at the first 3 of them, that's the issue number, and after that comes the variant in the printing code. So it will know the title you're scanning, but it won't know the issue you're scanning unless your barcode scanner is getting all the digits. So make sure it's doing that. All right, let's see here. Looking down, I think other people have chimed in on that one. I think we're gonna let that one go. I had one more tip that someone asked me for, and I wanted to show it real quickly, and then I'm gonna pack it in. So if you are using the current versions of ComicBase and you want to know how, so if you open up different databases over your time, you go to your file menu and you say, recent databases. This will have remembered all the databases you've ever opened, and you might be like, yeah, I don't really use that one anymore. How do I get rid of it out of this list? Now, there's the official way. The official way is just either change its name on your computer, move it to a different folder, do something so that ComicBase temporarily can't find it, and then it'll go away the next time ComicBase is launched, because it tries to verify that all these recent databases do in fact exist, and if it can't, it just loses them from the list. But we threw a hack in a little while ago, and I just want to show it to you. Is, let's say I want to get rid of master ComicBase data from the list. If I come over here and just right click on this one right here, it'll offer to just pull it right out of the list. Easy as that. So if you want to do some house cleaning on your things, just right click on the ones you don't want, bam, 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 they're gone. And then I would also say, if you go on ComicBase.com and if you're looking at the app and you want to get rid of databases from the app that you don't need anymore, if you go under ComicBase.com, go down to the profile section. At the bottom of this will be a list of your databases. You can remove them from there, and they'll disappear from your app listing. Those are the ones that the app will, that it's ever seen when you've been using the online services, and you can remove them from there. So anyway, that's a quick tip. Just want to throw those out there, and we'll take it from there. All right, guys. I think that will do it for now. Thank you so much for taking your time and hanging out with us here. We'll see you next week, and yes, please, if you have other things you'd like to see us do on the show, or questions you want answered, please let us know, and we'll take as many of them as we can. All right, and with that, farewell. Take care.